Welcome again, friends. We are talking about the immunology video lecture series, and this is the second video of that series. And in this video we will be talking about the different types of immune system cells. Okay, so let's talk about that. In the earlier video we talked about the overview of the immune system. We talked about the cell mediated immune system and humoral immune system. We also talked about the innate immune system and adaptive immune system, and we will see how they cross link with each other. But this is from the part of the cell mediated immune system, because one part of our immune system which is mediated by cells is pretty big, and that includes all the type of varieties of cells that are present in our bloodstream, and some of them present in different tissues of our body to fight against the infection. Okay, so we know these different cells of immune system who have specific function to fight against. They provide us the cell mediated immune system, and among all of them there are some cells who go against the pathogen directly. There are some cells who go against the pathogen infected host cell and kill that cell. There are some cells who help other cells or immunity to boost. There are other cells who help to produce antibody against infection. So we talked about 4 different types of cells, and so different variety of the cells are generated from only one type of progenitor cell, or we can call it as a mother cell, from where everything originates. It is known as hematopoietic stem cell. This is a stem cell. This is a totipotent stem cell. So this stem cell can generate, it's actually not toti, you can say it's a multipotent stem cell. Multi means many, multipotent, potent means a potency to generate many different varieties of cell from one. That's what is known as a multipotent stem cell or hematopoietic stem cells. Hematopoiesis means the development, and hemato means differently related with the blood. So development of all blood cells are from hematopoietic stem cells. Now from this stem cell we have the red blood cell, we have the platelet, we have the white blood cell, and among the white blood cell we have different variations. So let's look at this whole flow chart to understand about how all those things are originated first, and then we'll talk about each of those different cells and their functions in the immune system. So first thing I can talk, this hematopoietic stem cell is divided into 3 types of progenitor cells: lymphoid progenitor, myeloid progenitor, and erythroid progenitor. 3 types of progenitor cells are produced from this multipotent hematopoietic stem cells. Now all those progenitor cells like lymphoid progenitor, myeloid progenitor, erythroid progenitor, they are also pluripotent stem cells. Pluripotent means is very similar with the multipotent. They can also produce different variety of the cells. That's why they are called pluripotent stem cells. So see here, from the lymphoid progenitor they produces different types. From the myeloid they produces different set of cells. From erythroid completely different set of cells. So if we look at the lymphoid progenitor produces 2 further progenitor cells. They produce B cells directly. Sometimes they can also produce another progenitor known as natural killer T cell progenitor cell. Now from this natural killer T cell progenitor they can produce natural killer cell. They will also produce T cells. Now the T cell they produce first is known as naive T cell or T0. Naive T cell means these T cells are not destined to do any function. But when this naive T cell gets a response as a form of chemical signaling from a nearby cell, that is macrophage, this naive T cell gets activated. It produces effector T cell. Okay. Well, this natural killer cell's job is to find out the infected cell and kill that cell through apoptotic mechanism, while effector T cell help to kill and also help to develop the immunity to other cells. Now from these B cells directly they are matured enough to produce plasma cells, and you know plasma cells are filled with the process to develop antibody which is specific against a specific antigen. So that can be produced. So from one type of cell, that is lymphoid, we get 2 varieties, actually 3 varieties: T cell, B cell, and natural killer cell. They all developed from this lymphoid progenitor cell over there. Now if I move to the second one, which is myeloid progenitor cell, so they produces two more variety of cells, granulocyte and unknown. Granulocyte progenitor cells and unknown progenitor cell. We don't know much about that unknown progenitor type. From the granulocyte progenitor cell, they can produce three different varieties: eosinophil, neutrophil, basophil. Eosinophil, neutrophil, and basophil. Three different types of cells are produced. They are known as a granulocyte progenitor. Why they are known as granulocyte? Because if you look at those cells at this point, all those cells, eosinophil, neutrophil, basophil, if you look at them, those cells carry large nucleus and they have fragmented nucleus present. Those nucleus are fragmented 2 or 3 times and they produce a lot of granule-like structures inside those cells, eosinophil, neutrophil, basophil. So as they carry so many granules and their nucleus are kind of fragmented to look like granules, we call them granulocyte. Cyte means the cell, so granular cell, eosinophil, neutrophil and basophil. On the other hand, from the unknown progenitor cell, they produce what is known as monocyte. This monocyte can convert into 3 different types of cells from this progenitor. It can produce dendritic cell, it can produce macrophage, it can also produce mast cells. Okay? So all these 3 things, dendritic cells, macrophage and mast cells, these are all produced from monocyte. Okay? So mast cells are the modified version of monocyte. Macrophage is when the monocyte is transferred to the any kind of tissue. Dendritic cell is also small modified version of monocyte, which is present in different tissue layers, especially skin, lung, intestinal region and all those places. And the third progenitor cell is the erythroid progenitor. Is completely different and they produces all red blood cells. Actually they also divide into 2 parts. One is known as megakaryocyte and the erythroblast. From the erythroblast they produce erythrocyte. Erythrocyte is nothing but RBCs, that is the characteristic of the blood, the red color, because they carry hemoglobin, while megakaryocytes develop and produces platelets. These are the 2 things produced from erythroid progenitor. So if I look at here, the erythroid progenitor cells are not very important as a perspective of immune system and defense. While most of the immune system and defense cells are generated from the myeloid progenitor and lymphoid progenitor. Mostly myeloid progenitor and lymphoid progenitor, these are the cells that crosstalk with themselves and finally build up the cell mediated immunity and also the antibody mediated immunity of our body. While this erythroid progenitor cells like RBC and platelet play different roles, obviously very important roles, but some other physiological roles in our body, not the role of immune system mechanism. So as we now see all these examples of natural killer cell, T cell, dendritic cell, macrophage, mast cells, eosinophil, neutrophil, basophil and so many, we want to talk about each of those cells and where exactly these cells function during the immune system. We will talk about that in a moment. Then you will see the role of all these functions. So let me erase the board and we'll talk about each of those cells' functionality and exactly where they come to play in the cell mediated immunity. Now some part of these cells are a part of innate immunity, some portion of the cells are the part of adaptive immune response. I'll talk about each of them separately. So let's start talking about all those cells. The first cells we know we'll talk about, remember the division that we talked about earlier. The part of innate immunity, if we talk about, the innate immunity cells are those one which are present always and looking for pathogens to find. If they find any pathogens, they will find it and kill it. Example of such cell is macrophage. This is very dangerous type of cells in perspective of bacteria or other pathogen, because macrophage is a phagocytic cell. Okay, this is a phagocytic cell. So that means if there is any bacteria or the component of the bacteria, if there is any whole pathogen or the fragment of pathogen, it can recognize it. It can engulf that pathogen inside, and then it will break them down in small pieces. That is the job of macrophage. Okay, so phagocytic cell that is present, and macrophage is normally present in the tissues, in different regions of our tissue, in the intestinal tissue, in all those gastric tissue, and all those our skin tissue underneath the skin, and those regions of the tissue. Now this macrophages present in the tissue, normally macrophages are originated from monocytes. They are originated from monocytes. Monocytes are a part of white blood cells, remember, which are circulating through our blood. Okay, so these macrophages are the transferred version of monocytes. When monocytes are circulating through the blood, they are called monocytes. When they are transferred to the tissue, they will be known as macrophage. Okay, macrophage is present in our brain, known as glial cells or macroglial cells. Those monocytes invade and go to the brain tissue, they will be known as glial cells. They are present in the liver, known as Kupffer cells. So they have different names based on which tissue they are present. Okay, but they are the modified version of monocytes. That's the simplest thing I can tell you. Now the major job of these natural killer cells is to fight against cells directly. They don't want to find the pathogen independently, that we saw in case of macrophage. Macrophage finds the pathogen, break it down. But natural killer cell go against infected cells instead of the specific antigen. Let's say a pathogen, a bacteria invades in one of our normal cell. Now it's infected, that cell is sick. Now this natural killer cell will find that sick cell and will start releasing factors to kill that cell. So the job of natural killer cell mainly is to go against two types of cells, tumor cells and cancer cells, because there are so many type of modification take place in the cancer cells. They have different phospholipids coming to the outside of the membrane, and they have change in the membrane lipid composition, so many variations. Those things can be detected easily by the natural killer cells. Once they find those changes, they'll start secreting perforins, granzymes. Those secretions ultimately go to the apoptosis of that target cell. So apoptotic nature of this natural killer cell help us to fight against tumor cells and ultimately cancer cells in our body. Okay, the third type of cell that we already talked about and we saw the neutrophils. Neutrophils are one of the most important white blood cells that we know of, because in the whole white blood cell component, neutrophil carries almost 40 to 50% of the white blood cells are neutrophils, and over 50% cells neutrophils. And these neutrophil cells, they have a duty for again engulfing a pathogen or a fragment of pathogen inside. It will destroy those pathogen inside. So this is again phagocytic cell. Again, neutrophil is a phagocytic cell, and the function of it is to destroy. Neutrophil migrates from blood to tissue, okay, and it destroys the cell with the help of reactive oxygen species. They will develop some certain reactive oxygen species with lone pair of electrons in oxygen. They are very reactive, superoxides, and those superoxides are going to destroy the pathogen, especially bacteria. Now let's talk about the fourth one. And actually neutrophils specifically hold and kill mainly cells in a more sense, like it kills the bacteria as well as some cells in the overall sense, because if a cell is infected, for example, say in those cases neutrophil are going to release some factors that is going to kill that cell and create damage over there. Okay, that thing always presents there. It breaks down those cells, and even the normal cells, if it's infected, it will release some factors, it will destroy that cell, and can also start necrosis in little amount there. Then we have T cells. T cells don't have that much of function of specifically going and killing the cell. T cells help other cells to develop. There is a crosstalk between T cell and macrophage, which helps to produce more macrophages, and T cells can auto-regulate and produce more T cells. It can crosstalk with other cells to produce B cells that can ultimately produce antibody. So these T cells' job is not directly, but they are the part of adaptive immune response. Remember, and T cells' job is acting as a helper to further amplify the immune system signal in our body. In the white blood cell, if we talk about more, we have some more examples. We also have dendritic cells. Dendritic cells, these dendritic cells are among antigen-presenting cells, just like macrophages. Dendritic cell is an antigen-presenting cell. The idea of dendritic cell is they will generally go against infected cell, they will go against tumor cells, they will go against cancerous cells. They go against those cells, they find those infective agents. Now let's say bacteria is causing the infection. Dendritic cell will engulf that bacteria inside, it will break them down into fragments, and will put one of those fragments into a specific receptor known as MHC2, and they hold that receptor along with the antigen outside, and it will showcase that antigen to rest of the cells, T cells and B cells. They will identify this antigen and they can help to produce more specific antibody mediated response. That is the important job played by dendritic cells, macrophage. These are known as antigen presenting cells, or APC. Now if we talk about more about the dendritic cells are mostly found in, so they are APCs, and they are also phagocytic cells. But this dendritic cell usually present in our, say, the lymph glands. Usually present in the lymph glands, and also they are present in different layers of tissues, for example the skin, lungs, and gastrointestinal tissue in different places. From there they can move to the different lymph glands, and they can start there, they can showcase all those things, and actually they help in the training of T cell, in the development of B cells a little bit. That's the job of dendritic cells out there. Okay, so now we'll talk about another type of cell, that is eosinophil. Eosinophil is another type of white blood cells. Remember, there are eosinophil, basophil. Now the job of eosinophil and basophil is not fully understood yet, but it is found out that eosinophil has an important role to play against parasitic infections and infection against worms. They start to develop specific antibodies, a large amount of antibody, and this antibody will target those through, like those B cells develop certain antibodies that will cover those worms, because worms are big, and those eosinophils will involve with that, interact with those antibody coated worm, and start secreting and releasing certain chemical factors that will create pores in the body of the worm. As a result, the worm will be killed. That is the job of eosinophil. Now eosinophil migrates. So the job of eosinophil is not actually phagocytic, but it also releases some chemical factors that can kill. It's known as antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity, or ADCC, because the worm is there, antibody is coating the worm, eosinophil is interacting, releasing factors. So it's antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity mediated by eosinophil that we know of. That is the part in the job of eosinophil. And eosinophil again moves from blood to the tissue, just like the other white blood cells there. So from blood to tissue, this is the way of going. And the final one I want to talk about is, let me write it with this color, mast cells. Mast cells are very important quality of the cell, very important type of the cells. And mast cells have a very important role of developing specific body response again during inflammation. When the inflammatory response is required to fight against infection at the very start point of the infection, at that condition mast cells going to secrete certain chemical factors known as histamines, prostaglandins. Those histamines are vasodilator. They start to dilate the blood vessel. They cause an airway constriction. So these things known as anaphylaxis. So this whole symptoms, vasodilatation, airway constriction, known as anaphylaxis. This anaphylaxis is caused by these mast cells because they change all those things. And these mast cells have an important role with the process known as allergy. You know, all those type of allergy that we talk about, all those allergic symptoms are due to the secretion of histamine and all those different type of allergen that is releasing from the mast cells, because mast cells are hugely enzyme filled cells. They have multiple enzymes releasing from their, they have multiple granules present inside them filled with enzymes and factors, leukotriene, B4, some prostaglandin, histamine, and all these things that are released from the mast cells, and those things ultimately causes vasodilation, airway constriction, and ultimately they cause all those type of anaphylactic reaction, even cause allergy in response to the interaction with other allergen molecules with the help of immunoglobulin E. Now what is the whole process we will talk about later, but that is the job of the mast cells. So you see, all those cells are destined to do a specific job. The job for the macrophage, natural killer cells, and all those cells have a specific tone. The B cells, however, I didn't write it here. The B cells, which is the other part of the humoral immunity, it is matured enough to call it a plasma cells. It's modified into and turned into an antibody producing factory known as plasma cells. From those plasma cells, they start developing specific antibodies against the pathogenic antigen that enters into our body. That is the job of the B cells, which I haven't write it down. But the direct cell effect, if we talk about in the cellular immune responses, macrophage, natural killer cell, neutrophils, dendritic cells, eosinophils, mast cells, basophils, also very similar function with eosinophil, are present there to fight against our body, to take our body at the very innate or first round of defense against us. But T cells and B cells do the adaptive response of our body. Okay, so I hope you understand about how those all cells are originated from a single stem cell. We talked about that, from a single stem cell which give rise to all type of varieties of bodies, blood cells in our body, right? This is a pluripotent cell. From that pluripotent cell, so many different varieties of cells are generated. So, and all those functionality of the cells I've listed here. I hope you understand the video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and definitely subscribe to my channel. And look for the next video, because in the next video we'll be talking about how the cell mediated immunity contacts humoral immunity, because both of the immune line defense we require to carry out together, and how exactly when a pathogen enters our body react against it, and actually how the immune system develops in the first place. So stay tuned and watch the video series. Thank you.